I spent 2 years fighting cancer. Not a single family member showed up. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law, not even my grandson. But out of nowhere, my daughter-in-law appeared at my brand new $2 million beach house I had inherited from my brother. When I opened the door, I calmly spoke 3 words. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. 2 years, 7 and 30 days of fighting for my life while my own family acted like I was already dead. I'm 62 years old, and I thought I knew what loneliness felt like. I was wrong. Real loneliness is sitting in that sterile oncology waiting room, watching other patients surrounded by children, spouses, friends, while I clutched my wallet and tried to pretend I wasn't completely alone. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in March. Prostate cancer, stage 2. The doctor's words felt like they were coming from underwater as he explained treatment options, survival rates, the importance of having a strong support system. I nodded and smiled, already knowing I'd be facing this battle by myself. My first instinct was to call Marcus, my son. At 38, he'd built what looked like a perfect life with his wife, Ariella, in their suburban McMansion. I dialed his number with shaking fingers, rehearsing how I'd break the news gently. "Dad, I'm in a meeting," he answered without even a hello. "Can this wait, Marcus? I need to tell you something important. I just came from the doctor and—" "Look, whatever it is, can you text me? I've got back-to-back calls all afternoon." The line went dead before I could say the word cancer. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and cried for the first time since my wife Jana died 8 years ago. Not because of the cancer. I was ready to fight that. I cried because my own son couldn't spare 2 minutes to hear that his father might die. The first chemotherapy session was on a Thursday. I'd prepared myself for the nausea, the fatigue, the hair loss. What I hadn't prepared for was the crushing weight of walking into that treatment center alone, while every other patient had someone holding their hand. The nurse, a kind woman named Patricia, noticed immediately. "Is someone coming to pick you up, honey? You really shouldn't drive yourself home after chemo." I lied and said my ride was running late. Patricia gave me a look that said she'd heard that excuse before, but she was too professional to push. 3 hours later, I drove myself home in a chemical haze, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. That night, I called Marcus again. This time, Ariella answered. "Oh, Gary," she said in that syrupy voice she used when she wanted something. "Marcus is at the gym. Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "Ariella, I started chemotherapy today. I have cancer." Silence. Then, "Oh my God, wow, when did you find out?" 2 weeks ago. I've been trying to tell Marcus, but, well, you know how busy he is with the promotion and everything. This is just such shocking news. We'll definitely need to process this. Process this. Like my cancer was a business proposal that needed review. I was hoping maybe you and Marcus could visit this weekend. I could use the company, and I'd love to see little Marcus. Another pause. This weekend is actually terrible for us. We have Marcus's work thing, and little Marcus has soccer, and I promised my mother, but we'll definitely figure something out soon. Okay. Soon never came. Week after week, I sat in that chemo chair, watching other families navigate this journey together. There was Mr. Chen, whose daughter flew in from California every treatment cycle. There was Robert, whose wife never missed a session and brought him homemade soup every time. And there was me, making small talk with the nurses and pretending I had somewhere to be after my treatments. The hair loss started in week 4. I woke up to chunks of brown and gray on my pillow, and by noon, I looked like I was molting. I called Marcus from the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. "Dad, I told you I'm in meetings all morning," he snapped when he answered. "My hair is falling out, Marcus. All of it. I'm scared." A long sigh. "Look, that's normal with chemo, right? It'll grow back. Listen, can I call you tonight? We've got this presentation to the board and—" "Never mind," I whispered and hung up. I drove to the wig shop alone. The saleswoman was patient and kind as I tried on synthetic hair that felt nothing like my own. I settled on something close to my natural color, paid $230 I couldn't really afford, and wore it home, feeling like a stranger in my own skin. The worst part wasn't the treatments or the side effects. It was the silence. My phone never rang unless it was a doctor's office or a telemarketer. The mailbox stayed empty except for medical bills. No one brought casseroles or offered to drive me to appointments. No one asked how I was feeling or if I needed anything from the store. I started talking to myself just to hear a voice in the house. By month 6, I'd given up expecting anything from Marcus and Ariella. They'd sent one card, a generic thinking of you thing with no personal message, and that was it. No visits, no calls, no acknowledgement that their father and father-in-law was fighting for his life 30 minutes away. That's when the letter arrived from my brother Richard's attorney. I almost threw it away without opening it. Richard and I hadn't spoken in over a year, not since some stupid argument about our mother's estate. But something made me tear open the envelope, and the words on the page stopped my heart. Richard had died suddenly of a heart attack, and he'd left me everything. Everything turned out to be more than I'd ever imagined. The beach house in Malibu that I'd visited once as a child, worth over $2 million. Investment accounts I didn't know existed. A life insurance policy that made me financially secure for the first time since Jana's death. The irony wasn't lost on me. The brother who'd been estranged from me for years had provided more support in death than my own son had shown during my entire cancer battle. I finished my treatments in February, 18 months after they'd started. The oncologist used words like remission and excellent response, but I barely heard him. I was thinking about the keys to a beach house where I could start over, away from the disappointment of the family that had forgotten I existed. The moving truck came on a Saturday. I packed up 27 years of memories from the house where I'd raised Marcus, where I'd nursed Jana through her final illness, where I'd spent 2 years fighting cancer alone. As I loaded the last box, I realized I hadn't heard from my son in over 3 months. The beach house was everything I'd remembered and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific, a kitchen that actually got sunlight, bedrooms that didn't echo with loneliness. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I'd been there exactly 6 weeks when the doorbell rang on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't expecting anyone. I'd been careful not to share my new address with Marcus or Ariella. Through the frosted glass, I could see a woman's silhouette. Familiar but unexpected. My heart raced as I reached for the door handle. After 2 years of silence, what could possibly bring my daughter-in-law to my doorstep now? I opened the door to find Ariella standing on my new front porch, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the California heat, and she wore a flowing white dress that probably cost more than my monthly cancer medication bills used to be. But what struck me most was her smile. That practiced, brilliant smile she used at Marcus's work parties and family photos. The one that never quite reached her eyes. "Gary," she exclaimed, throwing her arms wide like we were long-lost friends. "Oh my God, you look amazing. I can't believe you didn't tell us about this gorgeous place." I stood in the doorway, not moving to embrace her, studying her face. In 20 years of marriage to my son, Ariella had visited my old house exactly 7 times, and 4 of those were for Christmas dinners. I had to beg them to attend. "How did you find me?" I asked quietly. Her laugh tinkled like wind chimes. "Oh, you know Marcus. He's so good at tracking things down. May I come in? It's absolutely scorching out here, and I'm dying to see what Richard left you." There it was. Not I wanted to see how you're doing, or I missed you, or even, "I'm sorry we weren't there when you needed us." She wanted to see what Richard left me. I stepped aside and let her in, watching as her eyes immediately began cataloging everything. The original hardwood floors that probably cost $50,000 to install. The custom kitchen island made from reclaimed teak. The crystal chandelier that cast rainbows across the living room walls when the afternoon sun hit it just right. "This is incredible," she breathed, her head swiveling like an owl's as she took in every detail. I had no idea Richard was so well off. Marcus always said he was just some eccentric hermit living by the beach. "Coffee?" I offered, more to buy myself time to think than out of any sense of hospitality. "That would be lovely, thank you." I led her to the kitchen, noticing how she lingered at the windows overlooking the ocean, probably calculating the view's value per square foot. As I prepared the coffee, she perched on one of the bar stools, crossing her legs and leaning forward with what she probably thought was a concerned expression. "Gary, I owe you such an enormous apology," she began, her voice taking on that earnest tone she used when she wanted something. "I know we weren't as present as we should have been during your situation." Situation. That's what she called 2 years of chemotherapy, radiation, and fighting for my life. "We were just so overwhelmed with everything," she continued, her hands fluttering dramatically. "Marcus's promotion came with so much stress, and little Marcus was having trouble in school, and my mother was having health issues of her own. You know how it is when life just crashes down on you all at once." I poured the coffee slowly, letting her words hang in the air. She was painting a picture of a family drowning in responsibilities, too busy saving everyone else to throw a life preserver to the man who'd raised the man she married. "How is little Marcus?" I asked, setting her cup down. "My grandson, now 9 years old, whom I hadn't seen since his 7th birthday party." "Oh, he's wonderful, growing like a weed. He's gotten so tall and he's doing amazingly in soccer. Marcus is coaching his team now." She paused, taking a delicate sip of coffee. "He asks about his grandpa Gary sometimes." The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, that if I hadn't known better, I might have believed it. But I did know better. I knew that little Marcus probably barely remembered I existed, just like his parents had forgotten during the most frightening period of my life. "That's nice," I said simply. Ariella seemed to sense that her first approach wasn't landing the way she'd hoped. She shifted tactics, her expression becoming more serious, more vulnerable. "Gary, I want you to know that not a day went by during your treatment that we weren't thinking about you. We didn't know how to help. Cancer is so scary and we felt helpless. We thought maybe it was better to give you space rather than burden you with our own anxiety about the situation." I almost laughed. They'd given me space, all right. Enough space to feel like I was floating alone in a vast, cold universe. "And then when we heard about Richard," she continued, shaking her head sadly, "we were devastated that we couldn't be there for you during your grief. But by then, you'd already moved, and we didn't want to intrude on your healing process." "How thoughtful," I murmured. She leaned forward, reaching across the counter to pat my hand. Her fingers were cool and soft, manicured to perfection. No calluses from holding a cancer patient's hand during chemo. No wear from scrubbing floors when someone was too weak to clean his own house. "But we're here now," she said with that brilliant smile, "and we want to make up for lost time. This place is absolutely stunning, Gary. You must be so happy here." I watched her eyes drift again to the living room, taking in the original artwork on the walls, the expensive furniture that Richard had collected over decades of successful real estate investments. She was calculating, cataloging, evaluating everything like an appraiser. "It's peaceful," I agreed. "I bet it is, and so close to town, but private. Richard really knew what he was doing when he bought this place. Do you mind me asking? I mean, I don't want to be nosy, but Marcus was wondering about the estate situation for tax purposes. You understand? He's always trying to help with financial planning." There it was, the real reason for this visit. Not concern for my health, not regret over their absence, not love for a father-in-law they'd ignored for 2 years. They wanted to know what Richard had left me and what that meant for their own future inheritance prospects. "Everything's been handled," I said carefully. Of course. Richard was always so organized. But if you need any help navigating the legal stuff, Marcus knows some excellent estate attorneys. And if there are any ongoing property management issues, Marcus and I would be happy to help however we can." Help. What a generous offer from the woman who couldn't be bothered to help me get to chemotherapy appointments. "That's very kind of you," I said, my voice neutral. She spent the next hour chatting about everything except the 2 years they'd abandoned me. She told me about little Marcus's soccer games, about the vacation they'd taken to Europe last spring while I was finishing radiation treatments, about the renovations they were planning for their house. As she talked, I found myself studying her face, trying to understand how someone could be so completely unaware of their own cruelty. Or maybe she wasn't unaware. Maybe this was exactly who she'd always been, and I'd just been too naive to see it clearly. When she finally stood to leave, she hugged me tightly, her perfume overwhelming in its sweetness. "We absolutely must get together more often now that you're settled in," she said, pressing her cheek against mine. "Maybe you could have us over for dinner next weekend. Little Marcus would love to see the beach. And Marcus has been working so hard lately. This would be the perfect place for him to relax." "I'll think about it," I said. "Wonderful. And Gary?" She paused at the door, her hand on the frame. "I'm just so glad you're doing well. You look healthy and happy, and after everything you've been through, well, it's just wonderful to see you thriving." After everything I'd been through, as if my cancer had been some abstract challenge that had nothing to do with them, rather than a battle I'd fought without the support of the family that should have been standing beside me. I watched her drive away in her white BMW, probably already on the phone with Marcus, describing every detail of the house and calculating its worth. They disappeared when I needed them most. But now that I had something valuable, suddenly they were interested in rebuilding our relationship. I walked back inside and stood in my beautiful living room, looking out at the ocean that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. For the first time since Ariella's visit began, I smiled. They had no idea what they were walking into. 3 days after Ariella's visit, I was sitting on my deck with my morning coffee when my neighbor Helen walked over with her golden retriever, Buddy. Helen was 75, a retired teacher who'd lived in the beach community for 30 years. She'd been one of the first people to welcome me when I moved in, bringing homemade cookies and offering to water my plants when I traveled. "That was quite a visitor you had the other day," she said, settling into the chair beside mine while Buddy sniffed around the deck railing. I looked at her curiously. "You met Ariella?" Helen's expression darkened. "Met her, honey?" She cornered me at the mailbox for 20 minutes, asking all sorts of questions about you, about Richard, about this house. She wanted to know how long you'd been here, whether you'd mentioned any financial difficulties, if you'd seemed confused, or what was the word she used? Forgetful, lately. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. Forgetful. She was very concerned about your mental state, apparently, Helen went on. Said the family had been worried ever since your cancer treatment that you might be showing signs of dementia or making poor decisions. She asked if I'd noticed anything concerning about your behavior. The words hit me like a physical blow. I set my cup down with trembling hands, my mind racing. "What did you tell her?" Helen snorted. "I told her that you're one of the sharpest people I've ever met, and that if she was so concerned about your welfare, maybe she should have been around during those months when you were actually sick." She reached over and patted my hand. "That woman has some nerve, I'll tell you that much." After Helen left, I sat on my deck for hours, staring at the ocean and trying to process what I'd learned. Ariella hadn't just been evaluating my house during her visit. She'd been building a case that I was mentally incompetent. The next morning, I drove to my old neighborhood for the first time since moving. I needed to understand what had been happening behind my back during those 2 years of treatment. I stopped first at the house next door to my old place, where Mrs. Rodriguez had lived for 15 years. Maria Rodriguez opened the door with a surprised smile. "Gary, how wonderful to see you. You look so healthy and rested. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you." "Maria, can I ask you something? Did anyone ever come by asking about me while I was sick? Any family members?" Her smile faded slightly. "Oh, honey, yes, your daughter-in-law came by several times. She seemed very worried about you." "What kind of worried?" Maria glanced around nervously, as if someone might be listening. "She said the cancer treatments were affecting your memory, that you were making strange decisions and forgetting important things. She asked if I'd noticed you acting confused or paranoid. She even asked if I thought you were still capable of living alone safely." My blood ran cold. "When was this?" "Throughout your treatment, maybe 4 or 5 times over those 2 years. She said the family was considering intervention, maybe finding you a nice assisted living place where you could get proper care." "Maria, did I ever seem confused to you, forgetful?" She looked genuinely puzzled. "Not at all. You were tired from the treatments, obviously, but your mind was always sharp. You handled all your own affairs, drove yourself to appointments, kept your house immaculate. If anything, I was amazed by how together you stayed during such a difficult time." I thanked Maria and drove to my old grocery store where I'd shopped for over 20 years. The manager, Tom, had always been friendly, often asking about my family during my cancer treatment. "Mr. Patterson," Tom greeted me warmly. "So good to see you looking well. How's the new place treating you?" "Very well, thank you." "Tom, I have an odd question. Did anyone ever come here asking about me? About my shopping habits or behavior?" His expression grew uncomfortable. "Actually, yes. Your son's wife came in several times. She said the family was concerned about your mental health after your cancer diagnosis. She wanted to know if we'd noticed you seeming confused, forgetting things, making unusual purchases." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you seemed perfectly normal to me. Maybe a little tired sometimes, but always polite. Always knew exactly what you needed." He hesitated. She seemed disappointed by that answer, to be honest. The picture was becoming clearer and more horrifying. Ariella hadn't just neglected me during my illness. She'd been actively working to undermine my credibility, questioning my mental capacity to anyone who would listen. That afternoon, I called my oncologist's office and requested copies of all my medical records. Dr. Mitchell's nurse, Susan, had always been kind to me during treatment. "Gary, of course, we can get those for you. Is everything all right?" "Susan, did anyone from my family ever call asking about my condition, about side effects or cognitive impacts of treatment?" There was a pause. "You know, it's funny you ask. Your daughter-in-law called several times, very concerned about potential memory issues or confusion from the chemotherapy. She wanted to know if we'd observed any cognitive decline that might affect your ability to make decisions. And what did you tell her? That you'd shown no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever. In fact, Dr. Mitchell always commented on how well-informed and engaged you were about your treatment. You asked excellent questions, followed instructions perfectly, and managed your care schedule better than patients half your age. I hung up the phone, feeling nauseous. The scope of Ariella's campaign was becoming clear. She'd contacted my neighbors, my grocery store, my medical team, all fishing for evidence that I was mentally declining. When she couldn't find any real evidence, she'd apparently decided to create her own narrative. But why? What was the endgame? The answer came the next day when I was cleaning out some boxes from my old house. Buried in a pile of old bills and medical paperwork, I found something that made my blood freeze. It was a photocopy of a document I'd never seen before. A petition for guardianship, Marcus Patterson versus Gary Patterson. The date was from 8 months into my treatment, when I was at my sickest from chemotherapy. According to the document, Marcus was petitioning the court to be appointed my legal guardian due to my diminished mental capacity resulting from cancer treatment and advanced age. The petition claimed I was no longer capable of managing my financial affairs or making sound decisions about my medical care. Attached were sworn statements from Ariella describing incidents of my supposed confusion and forgetfulness. She claimed I'd forgotten to pay bills, gotten lost driving to familiar places, and made irrational statements about family members. All lies. The petition had never been filed. At the bottom, there was a handwritten note from what appeared to be a lawyer. Insufficient evidence of incapacity. Need medical documentation or witness statements. Suggest gathering more evidence before proceeding. They'd been planning to have me declared incompetent. If they'd succeeded, Marcus would have controlled all my finances, all my decisions. And when Richard died and left me the house and investments, they would have controlled that too. I sat in my old bedroom holding the document with shaking hands as the full scope of their betrayal sank in. They hadn't just abandoned me during my cancer fight. They'd been actively plotting to steal my independence and my dignity while I was at my most vulnerable. The cruelest part was that they'd almost certainly planned to use my inheritance from Richard to fund their scheme. They would have controlled the beach house, the investments, everything, while I lived in some nursing home they chose, completely at their mercy. My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. It was Marcus. Dad, Ariella said she had a lovely visit with you the other day. She's so excited that you're doing well. I stared at the guardianship petition, my son's signature clearly visible at the bottom. Yes, I said carefully. It was quite enlightening. Great. Listen, we'd love to come see you this weekend. Ariella thought it would be nice to bring little Marcus to see your new place. Maybe we could all have dinner together. They were circling back, probably ready to launch phase 2 of whatever plan they'd been hatching. But this time, I would be ready for them. That sounds wonderful, Marcus. I'd love to see you all. Perfect. We'll drive down Saturday morning. Oh, and Dad, Ariella mentioned that you seem to be settling in really well. It's such a relief to know you're happy and stable. Stable, such an interesting word choice. Yes, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. I'm very stable indeed. Saturday morning arrived with perfect California weather, and I was ready. I'd spent the week preparing for this visit in ways Marcus and Ariella couldn't imagine. My lawyer, Patricia Chen, had been very interested in the guardianship petition I'd found. Very interested indeed. I'd also made some calls to Richard's estate attorney, a sharp woman named Sandra Walsh, who'd handled his affairs for 20 years. The conversation had been eye-opening in ways I hadn't expected. Your brother was quite specific about his wishes, Sandra had told me. He left detailed instructions about what should happen if anyone contested your inheritance or questioned your mental capacity. He was very concerned about potential family interference. That was my brother Richard. Even in death, he was looking out for me better than my own son ever had. The doorbell rang at exactly 10 o'clock. Through the window, I could see Marcus's black SUV in my driveway, the same car he'd driven past my old house countless times during my treatment without stopping. I opened the door to find my son looking uncomfortable in khakis and a polo shirt, clearly dressed up for the occasion. Behind him, Ariella wore another expensive dress, this one pale blue, and she was gripping little Marcus's hand like he might run away. My grandson had grown tall and lanky, all knees and elbows, with his father's dark hair and serious brown eyes. He looked up at me with curiosity, rather than recognition, and my heart clenched. This child, who should have been a constant presence in my life, was essentially a stranger. Grandpa Gary? Ariella prompted brightly, nudging little Marcus forward. Say hello to Grandpa Gary. Hi, he said quietly, clearly coached. Hello, sweetheart, I said, crouching down to his level. You've gotten so tall. How old are you now? 9, he answered, then looked back at his mother for approval. Come in, all of you, I said, stepping aside. I've made lunch. As they entered, I watched Marcus's eyes sweep the room just as Ariella's had during her first visit. But where she'd been calculating, he looked almost guilty, as if seeing my comfort and security made him uncomfortable. This place is incredible, Dad, he said, his voice strained. I had no idea Uncle Richard lived so well. He was very successful, I replied simply. We moved to the kitchen where I'd set out sandwiches and fresh fruit. Little Marcus immediately gravitated toward the windows overlooking the ocean, pressing his nose against the glass in wonder. Can I go see the beach, Mom? He asked. After lunch, honey, Ariella said, then turned to me with that practiced smile. Gary, you've done such beautiful things with this place. Have you thought about what you'll do with all this space? It seems like a lot for one person to manage. There it was, barely 20 minutes into the visit. The concern about my ability to handle my new circumstances. I'm managing just fine, I said, setting glasses of lemonade on the counter. Actually, I've been thinking about doing some entertaining. It's been so long since I've had family gatherings. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. That's great, Dad. You deserve to enjoy yourself after everything. After everything. Such a convenient way to reference 2 years of abandonment. Yes, I agreed. After everything, I've gained a new perspective on a lot of things. We sat down to lunch and I let them lead the conversation. Ariella chattered about their recent vacation to Hawaii, about little Marcus's school achievements, about the new car they were considering buying. Marcus talked about his promotion at work, the increased responsibilities, the stress of managing a larger team. It's been overwhelming, honestly, he said, running his hand through his hair. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in obligations. Everyone needs something from me all the time. I took a sip of my lemonade, thinking about all the times I'd needed something from him during my treatment. All the times he'd been too busy, too stressed, too overwhelmed to spare a moment for his dying father. That must be difficult, I said mildly. It is. That's why it's so nice to see you settled and comfortable here. One less thing to worry about, you know. One less thing to worry about, as if I'd ever been anything more than an item on his to-do list. After lunch, I took them on a tour of the house. Little Marcus was appropriately amazed by the ocean view from the master bedroom, and he loved the game room Richard had set up in the basement. For a few minutes, watching my grandson discover the ping-pong table and vintage arcade games, I almost forgot why his parents had really come. Then we went out to the deck, and Ariella started her real work. Gary, this is such a wonderful setup, but I can't help worrying about you being here all alone. What if something happened? What if you fell or had a medical emergency? There's no one around to check on you. I have neighbors, I pointed out. Helen next door has been very kind. Oh, that's sweet. But neighbors aren't family, and at our age. She paused delicately. Well, we all need to start thinking about these things more seriously. Our age. Ariella was 35 years old. Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. Dad, we've actually been talking about this, about your future care needs and planning ahead. Have you? We want to make sure you're protected, Ariella continued smoothly, both financially and medically. There are so many decisions to consider, and sometimes it helps to have family involved in the planning process. I watched little Marcus playing at the edge of the deck, building something with driftwood he'd collected, blissfully unaware of the conversation happening behind him. What kind of decisions? I asked. Marcus and Ariella exchanged a glance. Well, estate planning for one thing, Marcus said. Making sure your affairs are in order, and maybe considering what level of care you might need down the road. I'm in perfect health, I said. Of course you are. Now, Ariella agreed quickly. But cancer survivors sometimes face ongoing challenges. Cognitive issues from chemotherapy, increased risk of other health problems. We just want to make sure you have support systems in place. There it was again, the suggestion that my mind might not be what it used to be. That's very thoughtful of you both, I said, especially considering how attentive you were during my actual treatment. The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus flushed red, and Ariella's smile flickered for just a moment. Dad, we've talked about this, Marcus said quietly. We know we weren't as present as we should have been. We feel terrible about that. Do you? Of course we do. That's why we want to make sure we're involved now. We don't want to make the same mistakes again. I stood up and walked to the deck railing, looking out at the ocean. Behind me, I could hear them whispering urgently to each other, probably trying to figure out why this conversation wasn't going the way they'd planned. "You know," I said, turning back to face them, "I found something interesting while I was packing up the old house." Marcus went very still. "What's that?" I pulled the folded guardianship petition from my pocket and set it on the patio table. Both of them stared at it like it was a snake. "Would either of you like to explain this to me?" The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Little Marcus, sensing tension, looked up from his driftwood project with worried eyes. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. "Dad, that was just a precaution. Our lawyer suggested we explore all options in case your health deteriorated." "Interesting. Because according to this document, you were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent 8 months into my treatment. Not because of health deterioration, but because of alleged cognitive decline that, according to my medical records, never existed." Ariella's face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup. "Gary, you're taking this the wrong way. We were just trying to protect you." "Protect me from what? Making my own decisions? Controlling my own money?" "That's not... We would never..." Marcus stammered. "You would never what? Lie to my neighbors about my mental state? Question my grocery store manager about whether I seemed confused? Call my doctor's office fishing for evidence that I was incompetent?" They stared at me in shock. They'd had no idea I knew about their campaign to undermine me. "How did you..." Ariella whispered. "How did I find out that you spent 2 years telling everyone who would listen that I was losing my mind? That you were building a case to steal my independence while I was fighting for my life?" Marcus found his voice. "Dad, it wasn't like that. We were worried. And the lawyer said..." "The lawyer said you needed more evidence because you didn't have any. Because I wasn't incompetent then, and I'm not incompetent now." I leaned forward, my voice deadly calm. "But you know what I am? I'm rich. Richard left me over $2 million in assets. And suddenly, after 2 years of silence, you're deeply concerned about my welfare." "That's not fair," Ariella said, her voice shaking. "We're here because we love you." I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Love? You want to know what love looks like? Love looks like showing up to chemotherapy appointments. Love looks like bringing soup when someone's too sick to cook. Love looks like a phone call on the bad days just to say, 'I'm thinking of you.' Love does not look like planning to have your father declared incompetent so you can control his money." Marcus swallowed hard, his face flushed. "We never filed it," he said desperately. "We changed our minds." "You changed your minds because your lawyer told you that you didn't have a case," I replied. "But you kept the paperwork, didn't you, just in case?" They had no answer for that. I picked up the petition and folded it carefully. "Well, I have some news for you both. This house, Richard's investments, all of it comes with very specific legal protections. If anyone ever questions my mental capacity or tries to interfere with my inheritance, there are consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Ariella asked, her voice barely a whisper. I smiled, and for the first time in 2 years, it felt genuine. The kind that would make your current financial problems look like a minor inconvenience. Marcus and Ariella left 20 minutes later, taking a confused and upset little Marcus with them. As I watched their SUV disappear down my driveway, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: power. The phone calls started that evening. "First, Marcus," his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Dad, we need to talk. Can we come back tomorrow? I think we said everything that needed to be said today. Please, we can explain everything. You're misunderstanding the situation." I almost laughed. After showing them concrete evidence of their scheme to have me declared incompetent, he thought the problem was my misunderstanding. "Marcus, I understand perfectly. You and Ariella spent 2 years planning to steal my independence while I fought cancer alone. There's nothing complicated about that. It wasn't stealing, we were trying to help." "Help? By lying to my neighbors? By telling my doctor's office that I was showing signs of dementia? By preparing legal documents to have me declared mentally unfit?" Silence. Then in a smaller voice, "How did you find out about all that?" "It doesn't matter how. What matters is that I know exactly who you and your wife really are." The second call came from Ariella an hour later. This time the mask had completely slipped. Gone was the syrupy sweetness, the concerned daughter-in-law act. Her voice was sharp, desperate. "Gary, you can't seriously be considering cutting us off over some old paperwork that was never even used." "Can't I? We're family. We made mistakes, yes, but families forgive each other. And little Marcus adores you. You wouldn't really punish an innocent child for his parents' errors in judgment, would you?" There it was. The guilt card, played with precision, used my love for my grandson to manipulate me into accepting their betrayal. Ariella, in the 2 years I was sick, how many times did you bring little Marcus to see me? We've been through this. We were busy and we thought... 0, I cut in. The answer is 0. You used my grandson as a weapon today, dragging him into an adult conversation to make me feel guilty, but you've never once considered what was best for him, including having a relationship with his grandfather. That's not true. When was his last soccer game? The question caught her off guard. What? You mentioned he was doing amazingly in soccer, that Marcus coaches his team. When was his last game? It was last weekend, I think. You think? You don't know when your own son's soccer games are, but you expect me to believe you've been protecting him from his unstable grandfather? Another silence. Then, what do you want from us? I want you to leave me alone. We can't do that. We won't do that. You're family, whether you like it or not. No, I said quietly. Family shows up when you need them. Family doesn't plot against you when you're vulnerable. Family doesn't lie to your neighbors and your doctors to build a case for stealing your independence. I hung up before she could respond. The third call came at 11 o'clock that night. This time it was Marcus again, and I could hear Ariella coaching him in the background. Dad, we're coming down tomorrow. We need to settle this face to face. No. What do you mean, no? I mean, you're not welcome here anymore. You can't just cut off your family. Watch me. But I knew they wouldn't give up that easily. People like Marcus and Ariella didn't accept defeat gracefully, especially when $2 million was at stake. They showed up the next afternoon anyway, this time without little Marcus. I watched from my window as they parked in my driveway and marched to my front door like they owned the place. The doorbell rang insistently over and over. Dad, we know you're in there, Marcus shouted through the door. We need to talk. I sat in my living room calmly reading a book while they pounded on my door and shouted threats and pleas through the windows. After 20 minutes, they gave up and left, but not before Ariella screamed one final message. This isn't over, Gary. We won't let you destroy this family. That evening, I called my lawyer, Patricia Chen, and explained the situation. She listened without interruption, taking notes. Based on what you've told me about the guardianship petition and their behavior patterns, I think we need to take some protective measures, she said when I finished. People who are willing to plot against a cancer patient aren't going to respect a simple, leave me alone. What kind of protective measures? A restraining order for starters. We have grounds based on harassment and the attempted guardianship fraud. I'll also recommend security cameras for your property and an updated will that specifically excludes them from any inheritance. They're already excluded from my will. Good. But we need language that makes it clear any attempts to contest or challenge your mental capacity will result in additional consequences. Richard was smart to build protections into your inheritance, but we can strengthen them. The next week was a blur of legal preparations. Patricia worked quickly to get the restraining order in place, and I had a security system installed that would make Fort Knox jealous. Every entrance to my property was monitored, every conversation recorded. I also made some calls to little Marcus's school, not to interfere, but to understand exactly what kind of parents he was dealing with. The picture that emerged was troubling, but not surprising. Ariella was one of those helicopter mothers who showed up to every school event with a camera and a need to control every detail. Marcus was largely absent, too busy with work to attend most school functions. Their son was polite but withdrawn, according to his teacher. Bright but anxious, the kind of child who'd learned early that love came with conditions, and that disappointing the adults in his life had serious consequences. My heart broke for him, but I knew that trying to rescue him would only give Marcus and Ariella another weapon to use against me. The restraining order was served on a Thursday. Patricia called to let me know it had been delivered to both of them at their house, with little Marcus presumably watching. How did they react? I asked. About as well as you'd expect. Ariella threw the papers at the process server and screamed that you were a vindictive old man trying to destroy their family. Marcus threatened to fight it in court. Let them try. But I knew this was far from over. Desperate people do desperate things, and Marcus and Ariella were running out of options. The breaking point came the following Saturday. I was working in my garden when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the hedge, I could see Ariella stalking toward my front door, her face twisted with rage. She pounded on the door so hard I was afraid she might break the glass. Gary, open this door right now. We need to settle this. I stayed in my garden, continuing to plant the flowers I'd bought at the nursery that morning. The security cameras were recording everything. I know you're out there, she screamed. You can't hide from your family forever. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold, the sound of breaking glass. I called 911 immediately. 911, what's your emergency? Someone just broke into my house. I have a restraining order against them, and they've just violated it. The police arrived within 6 minutes. By then, Ariella had apparently realized the magnitude of her mistake. I found her sitting in my living room, surrounded by shards of glass from the window she'd broken, crying hysterically. "She's my family," she sobbed to the officers. "She's trying to destroy us. All we wanted was to help her." The police were professional but firm: breaking and entering, violation of a restraining order, destruction of property. Ariella was arrested and taken away in handcuffs, still screaming about family loyalty and my supposed mental instability. Marcus arrived an hour later, just as the police were finishing their report. I watched from my window as he spoke urgently with the officers, gesturing wildly, probably trying to explain that his wife was just upset and didn't mean any harm. The lead officer came to my door before they left. "Mr. Patterson, we've documented everything and we'll be filing a full report. Your security footage will be valuable evidence if this goes to trial. Is there anything else you need from us today?" "Just peace and quiet," I said. "Understood. And sir, you might want to consider changing your locks, just in case." After the police left, I stood in my living room looking at the broken window and feeling something I hadn't expected. Sadness. Not for Marcus and Ariella, but for the family I'd thought I had. For the son who'd once been a sweet little boy who brought me dandelions and told me I was the best dad in the world. For the daughter-in-law who'd once seemed genuinely happy to join our family. That evening, I got one final phone call from Marcus. "Dad, please. Ariella is in jail. They're saying she might face felony charges. Our lawyer says if you drop the charges, she could get probation and community service instead of prison time." "And why would I do that?" "Because we're family, because everyone makes mistakes, because this has gone far enough." I looked out my window at the ocean, watching the waves crash against the rocks below my house. Constant, relentless, wearing away everything that tried to resist them. "Marcus, do you remember when I was diagnosed with cancer?" "Of course." "Do you remember what you said to me when I called to tell you?" Silence. "You told me you were in a meeting and asked if I could text you instead. Your father was diagnosed with cancer and you couldn't spare 2 minutes to talk to him." "Dad, I do." "Do you remember the day I started chemotherapy? The day I sat in that chair for 3 hours getting poison pumped into my veins, fighting for my life?" "Yes." "Where were you that day?" More silence. "You were at your son's soccer game. The same son you claim I'm now trying to hurt by holding your wife accountable for breaking into my house. That's not fair." "Isn't it? You had 2 years to show me that family mattered to you. 2 years to prove that I was worth a phone call, a visit, a moment of your time. Instead, you spent those 2 years planning to have me declared incompetent so you could control my money. We never meant—" "You meant exactly what you did. And now you want me to save your wife from the consequences of her own actions because we're family. The same family that abandoned me when I needed them most." I could hear him crying on the other end of the line. "What can we do?" he whispered. "How can we fix this?" For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Some things can't be fixed, Marcus. Some betrayals are too deep, some wounds too raw. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't worth your time. Now I'm making mine. Please don't do this." "I already have." I hung up the phone and turned it off. Outside, the sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was beautiful, peaceful, perfect, and it was mine. 6 months later, I was sitting on my deck watching the sunrise when Helen walked over with her morning coffee and a small wrapped package. "Happy birthday, Gary," she said, settling into the chair beside mine. 63 looks good on you." I'd forgotten it was my birthday. For 62 years, birthdays had been about phone calls from family, awkward dinners where everyone pretended to be closer than they were, obligatory gifts that showed how little thought anyone had put into knowing me. This year, I'd simply forgotten to mark the date. "Thank you," I said, accepting the package. Inside was a small ceramic bird, hand-painted in blues and greens that perfectly matched the ocean view from my deck. "I made it in my pottery class," Helen explained. "The instructor said I should give it to someone who brings me joy. You were the first person I thought of." I felt tears prick my eyes. When was the last time someone had given me a gift simply because they wanted to, not out of obligation or expectation? "Helen, this is beautiful, but you hardly know me." She laughed, a warm sound that mixed with the crash of waves below us. "Honey, I've lived next door to you for 8 months. I've watched you create this beautiful garden from nothing. I've seen you reading on your deck every morning at sunrise. looking peaceful and content. I've watched you help Mrs. Kim with her groceries and offer to watch the Petersons' dog when they went out of town. She paused, sipping her coffee. I know you better than some people know their own families. The irony wasn't lost on me. My neighbor of 8 months knew me better than my son and daughter-in-law after decades. Have you heard from them? Helen asked gently. She knew the basics of what had happened, though I'd spared her the more painful details. No, the restraining order runs for another year, and Ariella's court case is still pending. Marcus hired an expensive lawyer, but breaking and entering is hard to explain away, especially with video evidence. Do you miss them? It was a question I'd been asking myself for months. Did I miss the son who'd once been the center of my world? Did I grieve for the family unit that had never really existed? I miss who I thought they were, I said finally. I miss the idea of having family who loved me unconditionally. But the reality? No. I don't miss being treated like an obligation or a burden. That afternoon, I drove to my old neighborhood for the first time since the confrontation. I wasn't sure why I felt compelled to go, but something was pulling me back to that life I'd left behind. The house looked smaller than I remembered, with a for sale sign in the front yard that had clearly been there for months. The lawn was overgrown, and several windows had broken blinds. It looked abandoned, forgotten. I parked across the street and sat in my car, remembering the 27 years I'd spent in that house. The Christmas mornings when Marcus was little, ripping through presents with the excitement only children can muster. The quiet evenings after Jana died, when the silence felt overwhelming. The long nights during chemotherapy when I'd sit alone in the living room, too sick to sleep but too tired to do anything else. Mrs. Rodriguez came out to get her mail and spotted me. She walked over with a concerned expression. Gary, how wonderful to see you. You look so healthy and happy. How are you feeling? Much better, thank you. Maria, is Marcus's house for sale too? Her expression darkened. Oh, honey. They lost it about 3 months ago. Foreclosure. I heard Marcus lost his job not long after all that trouble with the police. Apparently his company didn't appreciate the negative publicity. I felt a stab of something that might have been guilt, quickly followed by the reminder that Marcus had brought this on himself. Where are they living now? I'm not sure. I heard they moved in with Ariella's mother, but you know how rumors are. That poor little boy, though. I see him sometimes when Marcus picks him up for visits. He always looks so sad. Little Marcus. In all of this mess, he was the only truly innocent victim. A 9-year-old boy whose world had been turned upside down by his parents' greed and manipulation. Visits? I asked. Oh, didn't you know? Marcus and Ariella separated about 2 months ago. She's living with her mother, and he has little Marcus on weekends. The divorce is apparently quite contentious. I drove home feeling hollow. Their marriage, their financial security, their comfortable suburban life, all of it had crumbled in the aftermath of their scheme against me. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt tired. That evening, I found myself looking through old photo albums I'd brought from the house. Pictures of Marcus as a baby, a toddler, a little boy with gap-toothed grins and scraped knees. Pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, school plays. All the moments that had made me believe we were a real family. But looking at them now, I noticed things I'd missed before. In almost every family photo, I was slightly apart from the others, or Marcus was looking away from the camera, or there was some subtle distance that I'd attributed to normal awkwardness, but now recognized as something deeper. The signs had been there all along. I'd just been too desperate for connection to see them clearly. My phone rang, startling me out of my memories. I almost didn't answer when I saw it was an unknown number, but something made me pick up. Grandpa Gary. My heart stopped. It was little Marcus, his voice small and uncertain. Sweetheart, how did you get this number? I found it in Dad's phone. Are you really not allowed to see us anymore? I closed my eyes, trying to figure out how to explain adult failures to a child who shouldn't have to understand them. It's complicated, honey. Your parents and I had some disagreements about grown-up things. Dad says you're trying to punish us because you're angry, but Mom says you never really loved us anyway and you're just showing your true colors now. The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Even in the middle of their own crisis, they were poisoning their child against me. Little Marcus, listen to me very carefully. I love you very much. I always have, and I always will. The problems between your parents and me have nothing to do with you, and they have nothing to do with my love for you. Then why can't I see you? Because sometimes adults make choices that hurt other people, and then there are consequences for those choices. Your parents made some choices that hurt me very badly, and now we can't be around each other. Will it ever get better? I thought about that question for a long time. Would it ever get better? Could Marcus and Ariella ever acknowledge what they'd done and genuinely apologize? Could I ever trust them enough to let them back into my life? I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so. But I honestly don't know. I miss you, Grandpa Gary. I miss seeing your house and playing in your yard. I miss the way you used to make pancakes in funny shapes. I was crying now, tears streaming down my face as I remembered all the moments we'd shared before his parents decided I was worth more to them as a victim than as a family member. I miss you too, baby, so very much. Dad's coming back, I have to go. But Grandpa? Yes? I don't believe what Mom said. I know you love me. The line went dead, and I sat in my living room sobbing for the little boy caught in the middle of his parents' destruction. A year passed. I settled into a routine that brought me peace in ways I'd never experienced before. Morning coffee on the deck, tending my garden, reading by the ocean, long walks on the beach with Helen and Buddy. I joined a book club, took a pottery class, volunteered at the local animal shelter. For the first time in my adult life, my days were my own. No one needed anything from me. No one was disappointed in me. No one was plotting against me. The silence that had once felt oppressive now felt like freedom. I learned that Marcus had taken a job in Oregon, a significant step down from his previous position, but apparently the only offer he could get after the legal troubles. Ariella had moved back to her hometown in Arizona with little Marcus, and the custody battles were ongoing. They'd destroyed not just their relationship with me, but their relationships with each other. The greed that had driven them to plot against me had ultimately consumed everything they'd claimed to be protecting. On the second anniversary of my cancer diagnosis, I did something I'd been planning for months. I drove to the Children's Hospital, where I'd received some of my treatment, and wrote them a check for $50,000 to fund a support program for cancer patients without family support. "This is incredibly generous," the development director said as I handed over the check. "May I ask what inspired this particular donation?" "I spent 2 years fighting cancer alone," I said simply. "No one should have to do that." As I drove home that afternoon, I felt something I'd been searching for my entire adult life. Completeness. Not because I had a family who loved me, but because I'd finally learned to love myself enough to walk away from people who didn't. That evening, I sat on my deck watching another perfect sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The ocean stretched out endlessly before me, constant and reliable in a way that people never were. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "Wine on the deck tomorrow evening. The Petersons want to join us, and I'm making my famous cheese board." I smiled and texted back, "I'll bring dessert." This was my family now. Not the one I'd been born into or married into, but the one I'd chosen. People who showed up when they said they would, who remembered my birthday, who offered help without expecting anything in return. People who saw me not as an obligation or a resource to be managed, but as someone worth knowing, worth caring about, worth loving. At 63, I'd finally learned the most important lesson of my life. The price of absence is ultimately paid by those who choose not to be present. Marcus and Ariella had traded their place in my life for a shot at my money, and they'd lost both. But I'd gained something infinitely more valuable than anything they could have taken from me. I'd gained myself. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.